I'm going to give you a list of numbers that I want you to remember. Are you ready? Here we go. 81, 5, 3, 8, 10, 22, 57. Again, 81, 5, 3, 8, 10, 22, 57. Chances are you'll remember them by the end of this episode. But will you remember them tomorrow or in 2 weeks when we talk about memory and the ADHD brain? This is the heart of today's episode. We're diving into the neuroscience of learning and revealing practical ways to supercharge your child's memory and concentration. Hello and welcome to the Mindful Toolbox. I'm Sarah Lynn, your cheerleader-in-chief, lifelong learner, and slightly obsessed researcher. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. You, my friend, have earned a badge as a Toolbox regular. And if you're new, a big warm welcome to you. You've landed in a space where we believe learning should be structured and safe. So before we dive into today, don't forget to scroll back through our episode catalog. There are so many resources already there for you, and it will give you an idea of who we are, how we curate the neuroscience and the research, and present it in tangible, practical, bite-sized methods that allow you to move forward confidently. Today, we are lifting the lid on the biggest frustrations I hear from parents on the daily. Why does my child forget everything they studied? Why did they draw blanks in an exam? If you've ever watched your child revise for hours and then blank or miss questions you knew they should have got, you're not alone. And today, we're flipping that pattern. We'll be diving into what really sticks. So let me start by introducing you to a concept that is a game changer. It's Ebbinghaus's Forgetting Curve. In the late 1800s, psychologist Erman Ebbinghaus discovered that within just 24 hours, we forget up to 70% of new information. 70%, unless we do something to interrupt that decline. So when we forget something, it's not laziness, it's not poor effort, it's biology. The brain is consistently clearing out information that it deems as unnecessary. So if we don't revisit it, it vanishes. That's why traditional revision techniques like rereading, highlighting, cramming, they all feel productive, but often don't work to our advantage. So before we get into some of the practical tips, let's understand how memory actually works. Let's do a little neuroscience one-on-one. Learning, real, durable learning, happens in 3 key stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. So let's go through this a little bit more. Encoding. So this is when new information enters the brain. It's handled by an area called the hippocampus, which acts like a sorting office. And if you've seen episode 2 of the Mindful Toolbox, you'll recognize the word hippocampus because we refer to it as the memory-saving elephant. It's where all of the memories and data is stored. It is where we decide, is this worth remembering? And where should it go? What is it connected to in the sorting cabinet that's already in existence? So this happens in the hippocampus, but here's the kicker. Encoding and putting something into memory is not just passive. It's not looking at a worksheet, it's not even listening in class, and it's not taking notes. It's actively engaging. So chunking ideas together, making connections, forming associations. That is how the brain decides this is worth keeping. It's about the amount of energy expended on that new learning. And another caveat, there's a limit to keep in mind. Short-term memory can only hold around 7 items. So if your child doesn't encode that new info meaningfully, it disappears. That's why a long revision section without structure often leads to poor retention. Cramming for an hour is way less effective than using a guide or a structure, a timer, help break up and pace that hour. The second one is storage. So once something is encoded, it then has to be stored. So this happens in different areas of the brain, but it requires time. So this happens during sleep, quiet rest, spaced review. The brain essentially gets to decide what moves from short-term into long-term storage. So if your child crams the night before without rest or without reinforcement, it's really unlikely that this information was stored into long-term. They may have the ability to regurgitate it in an exam, but did they learn it? Do they know it? This is why we see real big mountains and valleys in student learning. The third one, and this is the one that school and the education system seems to prioritize. This is retrieval. It's what every test and every revision session is building towards. Are we able to retrieve the information at the right time? So can we pull it from long-term forward? Here's the truth. Retrieval will only work well if encoding and storage were done properly. And the only way to strengthen retrieval is by practicing it again and again and again. Quick check-in. Do you remember the numbers I asked you to remember earlier? 81, 5, 3, 8, 10, 22, 57. Now that we understand how memory works, let's put on our Mythbusters cap and dive into some of the things that we took as truths but really are not helpful. These are common techniques that feel comforting, but they really don't work. The first is rereading notes. This creates a false sense of familiarity because you're just rereading it, but you're not understanding it. And like I said earlier, encoding takes effort. There's zero effort if you're just rereading it. The second is highlighting everything. It feels like you're organizing, it feels like you're doing something, but it can actually lead to overwhelm in the brain. You need to ensure you're organizing it well. And the third is cramming the night before. Who doesn't love a little bit of pressure? This stops the brain from being able to consolidate the information, and it can create a lot of cortisol and stress, which actually inhibits the ability to make neural pathways and create learning. So these three methods, they feel easy, but memory building is actually about effort. The amount of effort that you put into something is what will allow it to stick. Unfortunately, these don't align with how the brain naturally learns. In contrast, active, effortful techniques, the ones that feel hard, those are the ones that lead to stronger, more lasting results. And that is what we're going to look at next. Okay, so I have for you a couple of effective techniques that I'm sure you're going to want to steal. So make sure you grab that pen and paper and you're writing these down. Here is a cheat sheet to help get us situated. I'm going to dive into each of them way more in depth, but here's a good starting point. The first method that you're going to want to steal is spaced repetition. We're going to revisit material at an increased interval. Right when you're about to forget it, we pop it back in that brain. The second is active recall. So instead of rereading something, test yourself. Retrieval strengthens memory. So practice pulling that information to the forefront of your brain. And the third, is dual coding. Combine visuals and text like mind maps and keywords to engage multiple parts of the brain. I think this is where highlighting kind of comes into play. But if we just highlight and there's no structure, that's when we can get trapped into feeling like we're doing something when we're not. I know you've heard those 3 things and you're thinking, well, that sounds like a lot of effort. And you're right. The effort is the signal to the brain. It's the signal that says, this matters, save this please. Coming up next, I'm going to talk to you about one of our students from Bettering Youth, the tutoring company that I own, and how they've improved scores by 20% using these tools. And we're going to unpack how you can help your child start today. But first, let's pause and look at why spaced repetition works so well. And how can we set it up without needing any fancy apps or even expensive planners? Because if you're like me, I tend to think that I will do better with a new planner. And that's not always the case. Just a little truth bomb for you. Okay, while we're having a truth bomb, let's take a moment. How did you revise when you were younger? Did it actually stick? Were you feeling successful? Do you wish someone had shown you back then how to do it? Lean in, we got another test here. 81, 5, 3, 8. What comes next? 10, 22, 57. All right. No worries. If you didn't get that, that's okay. We got a couple more spaced repetitions coming at you shortly. That was an example of active recall, being able to pull that information forward. Speaking of spaced repetition, let's circle back to Ebbinghaus. He didn't just reveal how quickly we forget something. Remember, 24 hours, 70% is gone. He also gave us the antidote because he's a very nice guy. He gave us spaced repetition. So this technique interrupts what he called the forgetting curve by asking us to revisit information just before it disappears. So instead of revising everything the night before, let's imagine a structure that will actually work. So in day 1, you learn it. In day 2, you review it. Day 4, you quiz yourself. Day 7, you teach it to someone else. Day 14, you use it in a practice question. And each time your brain revisits this new learning, it's a signal to your memory. It says, hi, please write this down on a Post-it note. It is incredibly important. And gradually, that information settles in nicely to your long-term memory. There's no expensive tools that you are required, just a bit of planning. So you can use a simple calendar, Post-it notes, even color-coded folders, whatever it is that you think. And I'm going to link in the show notes a free sample schedule just in case you're looking for more ideas. There's also going to be different websites that I'm going to recommend in our show notes, like Anki or Quizlet, which will just help to review certain things in spaced intervals. So there's like a rotation pile. So material gets resurfaced regularly. Okay, the second one that I want to talk about today is active recall. And I'm not going to lie, this is where things get uncomfortable, but effective. What does active recall mean? It means don't look at your notes. Ask yourself, what do I remember? Yes, it might feel like failure at first because you're thinking, well, I don't remember anything. But the research is clear. The act of trying to remember actually strengthens the memory. So encourage your child to cover up their notes and write down everything they remember post a 10-minute learning sprint. Or create flashcards. Or watch a YouTube video and before it finishes or at specific parts, pause it and then just jot down everything that you can remember. Another option is to try past paper questions without peeking at the answer or the modeled answer. This isn't just about exam prep. What we do here in the Mindful Toolbox podcast is never just about the academics or in the classroom. It's about learning how we can interact with the world, and this is about how the brain can retrieve something on demand. So yes, it's perfect in an exam situation, but you know those times when you have a song stuck in your brain and you just can't quite figure it out? Practice active recall. It trains the brain, the memory strengthens, and you start to feel more confident, trusting that you can pull out that information. In terms of tools, what we can look at are turning your notes into questions. For example, what are the 3 types of rocks? So if you've just done a geology section and you've written out the 3 types of rocks are sedimentary, no, I don't actually know what they are. But if you did, instead of just writing out what they are as a definition list, write it as a question. What are the 3 types of rocks? Or how does photosynthesis work? Another thing that you can do is use whiteboards, Post-its, or even record voice notes. This works especially well for particular brains. I want to share one of my students, Ethan. He started using the drives to football club as his opportunity to blurt out everything that he could recall about a specific topic. And this was phenomenal. Blurting is one of my favorite things in the world for learning because it allowed him to say out loud, so to say it and hear it, what it is that he remembers about a specific topic. And because he was around his family, so he was driving often with his mom and his sister to and from football, they were able to ask questions to find out a little bit more, like clarifying questions. And this then turned from just a blurting phase to now Ethan was going through the process of teaching and explaining what he had learned. It showed where his gaps were, it showed what he was confident with, and it helped him to really embed the learning because he had to communicate it in a way that was concise for someone else to learn it as well. So within weeks, Ethan, our dear friend Ethan, he remembered more with less time. It does. It cuts down the amount of time that you have to spend. Increased effort, less time. Speaking of, what are our 7 numbers, friends? 81, 3, 5, 8, 10, 22, 57. Remember it, 57. Okay, that leads us to number 3, the third technique that you're going to want to steal to improve your ability to learn and remember something, and that's dual coding. Have you ever remembered how children are able to, and maybe even yourself, remember quotes from movies or TikTok dances, but do not remember their homework? That's because the brain loves multi-sensory learning. Dual coding taps into that. It combines verbal and visual processing. So what can we do? Sketch a diagram to go with the definition. Pair mind maps with color-coded keywords. This is where your highlighting actually starts to work. Use symbols, arrows, timelines. If you're reading a book and you need to remember key chapters or key quotes, make a comic strip. Write it out while you're drawing. When these 2 types of inputs come together, it doubles your chance that you're going to remember it. It doubles your chance. So why wouldn't we do it? And if your child is more of a visual learner or they have a neurodiversity, this approach here is a game changer. So what kind of tools can you use? If your child is learning the water cycle, don't just write it out. Draw the clouds, pop arrows, and the droplets. Where does everything go? Their ability to remember the visual process will be their hero moment. If your child is learning algebra and they have a real visual brain, go through what each step of factorization needs to look like. There's a format of what it needs to look like at each phase, regardless of the question. There's different variables within and outside of the brackets at each stage. So practice looking at not just what's happening and where it's going and how we're doing that factorization, but what does it look like? Can you spot a pattern? That will unlock it all. And I think maybe one of the best parts that I love about this is that you don't really have to teach this to your child. You can start really passively by just asking them to show you what they've learned. I mentioned earlier that blurting is one of my favorite active recall methods, and it absolutely is. Whenever I start a lesson and my student tells me that they've just learned a new topic, let's say they're learning about Romeo and Juliet, the very first thing that I'm going to do as their tutor, their mentor, their coach is to ask them to blurt out on paper or out loud, depending on their learning style, everything that they can remember about what they've already learned. It really helps me to assess what has stuck with them, what maybe they've misunderstood and where there's a gap, and where we can go next. It makes no sense for me to come in and make assumptions as to where they are and what they know and where we need to go without really understanding their foundation. Plus, this not only helps me as their educator, but it's dual purpose because it actually serves the student as well, acts as a process of active recall. So if your child comes home and they share with you that they've just learned something new, you can very casually ask them, what is it that you remember? I don't think I remember anything about photosynthesis. I think it has to do with plants. Do you remember what it has to do with? Tell me what you know. And make it a conversation. Not only do children love it when we go to them for guidance and give them an opportunity to teach us something, but that process of actively recalling information is gold when it comes to strengthening memory. Further to that, the process of having to explain something out loud means that they need to practice synthesizing and organizing the information. One of our tutors was working with a year 4 student and they had just been exposed to shapes, so quadrilaterals, and we were discussing how the child had such a good ability at being able to remember what the word sounded like or what the first letter of the word is. So for instance, scalene, a scalene triangle. She couldn't quite remember the name scalene, but she knew it started with an S and it ended with an E and it kind of went ska. This is gold. If we can start tapping into how our child's brain processes, functions, learns, then we can start tweaking and adapting to suit their learning process, their learning preference. And for me, what we learned from that is that their brain is incredibly visual because they're able to recall where letters are in a word. They're just maybe not able to process auditory processing as strong because they weren't able to recall what it sounded like. Well, this is phenomenal. We were able as tutor and mentor to tweak the upcoming lessons to suit someone who had more of a visual preference and do lots of dual coding that suited that, and write an email to the parent explaining that we're going to trial a couple of sessions that really hone in on this visual learning and see if it works. And I think that's gold. I think that's so wonderful that even though every person's brain learns differently, we can look for things that are similar amongst us and fine tune and tweak the process to be even more efficient. I think that's amazing. Speaking of efficiency, I want to share another one for all of you that are kind of on the fence about how we can really effectively tune into the learning process and use it for efficient memory creation. So this year 10 student, let's call her Zara. She was working with me for science and she really was so disheartened when we first started working together. She was frustrated. She was upset. She was going into avoidant tactics because she had spent so much time revising. And in year 10, there are many mock exams. And unfortunately, despite the amount of time she was revising, the feedback loop that she was getting from the marks were not proportional. She kept receiving disappointing marks for what she wanted for herself. So what we did, we looked at a 6-week process together. We looked at improving spaced repetition and dual coding. So after a couple of sessions together, I noticed that she was really good at auditory learning. So we did a lot of voice note revision. We did a lot of podcast revision because there are so many GCSE topic podcasts out there. Definitely go look. I'm going to link my favorite in the show notes. But we noticed that she was really good at auditory processing. So we played to her strengths, implemented that dual coding with spaced repetition. And within 6 weeks, she saw such a big improvement. She went up a whole grade point. In 6 weeks, she went up a whole band. I think she was originally at a 5 for science, and she went up to a 6, a grade 6 in 6 weeks, which was incredible. Not only was it incredible academically, but what it did was she now knew how she learned, had built incredible understanding of the actual learning process. This motivation that was lacking before for revision was now completely unlocked because she understood how the learning process requires effort rather than time. So now she was efficient, she was motivated, she was completely laser focused on her strengths, and everything unlocked for her. I think it's just, that to me just gives me chills and excitement because learning is accessible, and it's accessible to anyone if we understand how the brain and memory works and we fine tune and tweak it to suit the learner. Okay, checking in again. How do our number sequences start? If you said 81, 5, 3, 8, 10, 22, 57, you are off to the races, friends. Well done. Make sure you keep that locked in there. So, before we jump into today's takeaway tools, I want to speak directly to our parents of neurodiverse learners, because that's what we do here in this podcast. This is a safe place for neurodiversity as well as neurotypical. And I appreciate that some of these tools or tips will suit some learners better than others. Whether your child has ADHD, dyslexia, autism, or is wired a little differently, you probably notice that these traditional revision advice or methods, they don't always suit your child. Now, I want to emphasize that this is not a failure. It's a different kind of brain that needs a different kind of support. So I do want to share with you one practical tip to start with, and we'll call it chunk the challenge. Instead of saying go revise science or today you're revising science, say instead, let's pick one flashcard from your biology set and draw it out together. Okay, there's a couple of things that are happening here. One, we're reducing overwhelm by taking away a big task. 2, it respects your child's capacity in that moment. 3, it gives them a little bit of support without you needing to help or assist. You're there as a guide, but you're not there to drag them along the journey. So why does this work? It works for many brains, but especially for a neurotypical brain who often gets overwhelmed by choice, often feels like they need to be perfect or understand something perfectly before they can give it a go, or who feels overwhelmed by the unknown. So what we do when we're saying, let's pick one flashcard, we're reducing the load. When we're saying, we're going to draw it together, let's draw the card together, you're saying to them, if you need help, I'm right here. It's not a problem. So by doing that, we are creating a learning environment that will build trust, will build momentum, and then it will lead to increased internal motivation. And I want to share with you that this is the best part, to me anyway. Episode 7, so our next episode launching in 2 weeks, is dedicated entirely to this. We're going to be talking about memory and focus it through the lens of the ADHD brain. We're going to be looking at tools designed to reduce frustration and increase confidence. So, if today's episode felt helpful, I really, really hope that next week is going to feel like a deep exhale, like, okay, we could do this. All right. Before I leave, like normal, I want to offer you a challenge. Take it, you can leave it, choice is yours. But what I would like for you to do is choose a strategy to start with your child. Whether you turn a topic into flashcards, you do a teach back session where they explain something back to you, you figure out if their learning preference is visual, auditory, maybe a little bit of kinesthetic, and you practice dual coding, or at least you talk about what kind of dual coding process they would prefer. Keep it light, friends. Honestly, make it playful. This is about building habits and exposing yourself, your family, your child to different ways of approaching learning. It's not ever about perfect results. So on that note, here are some practical tips of how you can support at home without needing to be a teacher, an educator, a tutor, a coach, or an expert. Okay? 1, start small. Pick one topic. Set reminders to review it in day 1, 2, 4, and 7 days later. Use questions, not notes. So ask, can you explain this back to me? Not, what have you read? Encourage visual aids. There's nothing wrong with having pictures or doodles or diagrams or lyrics with you. Oh, I have something to share. This is actually really funny. This is all about dual encoding, actually. So when I was in what would be the equivalent to year 8 science, there's 3 science classes, 3 science groups in biology. And one of the first groups had done a test and they told us what the bonus question was. I know, we probably shouldn't have found out, but we did. And we found out that the teacher was asking us to write out the real proper word for DNA. And we had to have good spelling. And I was sitting there trying to memorize this really long word. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, deoxyribo. And then I will never forget this moment. This is how strong and how powerful this can be, dual coding. A group of girls came dancing through the hall, singing what this word was. They said, deoxyribonucleic acid, deoxyribonucleic acid. Tell me that is not catchy. And as soon as I sat down in my test, I knew exactly what DNA stood for because it had been dual coded. I could look at how it was spelt because I have a very good visual memory, but the repetition and the rhythm really suits my kinesthetic vibe because I was kind of dancing along. There was a sway, there was a rhythm. Deoxyribonucleic acid. I promise you, it will unlock learning for your child. Okay, going back, the next thing that you can do at home that will help support them is to quiz, not cram. I cannot tell you how important it is for your child to practice past papers. This is not just me saying this as a buzzword or a click-worthy moment. Tutor says to do past papers. Of course she does. No, it's because you're practicing active recall. It's so important. The last thing, and probably my rule above all else in all aspects of life, is to celebrate effort, not result. Essentially, memory isn't magic, right? It's not a gift that some people are really good at and some people aren't. You don't have a bad memory. You just haven't unlocked how to tap into it. And it's not about working harder or spending more time revising. It's about working with the brain, not against it. These techniques, they might feel slow at first, and they're probably going to slow you down a little bit, but they're so powerful. And once you figure out what works and what works for your brain, you'll be off to the races. Learning sticks long after the test is done, and that will help them move through school. Because they get exposed to fractions in year 4, and yet our year 11s are still struggling. Why? Because they haven't encoded it properly. So do everyone a favor and spend some time with your child talking about these 3 processes and how you can tweak them and fine-tune them so it makes learning so efficient for them. Okay, checking in again. Do you remember those numbers from the start? I bet you do. 81, 5, 3, 8, 10, 2257. Now imagine what's possible when your child learns to work with their brain instead of fighting it. That was just a little bit of active recall and spaced repetition. But I bet if you kept doing it, you would be able to tell what they are at the beginning of episode 7. Until then, thank you so much for tuning into the Mindful Toolbox podcast. I'm Sarah Lynn, and whether you're walking the school run, doing dishes, or hiding in the pantry for 5 quiet minutes with your coffee, I see you. If this episode sparked ideas or helped shift something for you, I'd really love it if you'd hit the subscribe button, leave a review, or share it with another parent who needs a little bit of support. And don't forget to check those show notes for today's checklist. I've put in the tools that I really love, as well as a series. There is a studying one-on-one blog series on the Bettering Youth website that goes through all of this more in depth. And don't forget to hit the bell so you are notified whether you are on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube of our next session, our next episode. We are going to be looking at how to build these memory techniques into a weekly routine, a weekly revision routine that's low stress, high reward, especially for busy families and children with ADHD. So you're not going to want to miss that. But until then, keep your tools sharp, your snacks nearby, and your child's curiosity alive. We'll see you in the next one. Yay! Ooh, I like that one.